Looming over the concrete desolation of Pershing Square stands a monument to a lie. The Biltmore, a Beaux-Arts cathedral rising from the smog of downtown Los Angeles. 11 stories of limestone, brick, and terracotta. Stone angels carved into the cornice look down with eyes that have seen a century of sin. Inside, it is a labyrinth of gold leaf and crystal chandeliers, designed to dazzle the eye. But this isn't just a hotel. It is a fortress built to keep the secrets of the city locked inside. Tunnels that run like veins into the deep earth. A lobby that echoes with the last footsteps of the Black Dahlia. Walls thick enough to silence the screams of history. Beautiful, yes, but beauty is the perfect place to hide a monster. The air in Pershing Square at 3 in the morning carries a specific kind of heaviness. A density composed of Pacific fog mixed with the exhaust of a century of traffic and the stale, sweet scent of decaying palms, and if you stand there long enough, looking west across the street, the Millennium Biltmore Hotel stops looking like a building and starts looking like a fortress constructed to keep the modern world at bay. It rises from the concrete of downtown Los Angeles not as a welcoming host but as a grand, imposing monolith of brick and terracotta, a Beaux-Arts cathedral dedicated to the gods of excess and secrecy, where the stone angels carved into the cornice look down with eyes that have seen the city transform from a dusty outpost of citrus groves into a sprawling metropolis of neon and noir. To understand the Biltmore is to understand the fundamental psychological fissure of Los Angeles itself, a city that is constantly projecting a desperate, sun-drenched optimism while its foundation is built on water theft, land speculation, and the crushed dreams of the millions who arrived looking for paradise and found only pavement. The hotel is the physical embodiment of this duality, a structure that presents a facade of impossible luxury, frescoes, marble, gold leaf, crystal, while concealing a history that is inextricably linked to the darkest chapters of American crime, political corruption, and the unexplained. When the fog rolls in off the ocean and settles between the skyscrapers, the Biltmore seems to disconnect from the grid of the city, becoming an island of time where the year is always 1947, where the shadows in the long, vaulted hallways act as storage space for the secrets of the dead, and where the silence is not an absence of noise but a deliberate suppression of the truth. It is a place where the walls do not merely observe history. They seem to absorb it, staining the internal atmosphere with a residual psychic weight that presses down on anyone who walks through the heavy brass doors on Olive Street. The Biltmore was built to be the host of the coast, a beacon of high society and civilized living in the Wild West, yet its legacy is defined less by the presidents and kings who slept in its suites and more by the victims who walked out of its lobby and into oblivion. The vision for the Biltmore did not arise from a desire to provide shelter but from a deep-seated insecurity that plagued the civic leaders of Los Angeles in the early 1920s, a collective inferiority complex regarding the established cultural powerhouses of the East Coast like New York and Chicago, driving them to commission a structure that would silence any critics who dared to call their city a provincial backwater. It was 1921 when the plan was hatched, a time of manic energy and post-war hubris, and the mandate given to the architectural firm Schulze and Weaver was not to build a hotel, but to build a monument that would force the world to take Los Angeles seriously. The architects, fresh from their triumphs in New York, approached the project with the scale of pharaohs, envisioning a hybrid of Spanish Renaissance and Italian Beaux-Arts styles that would scream legitimacy through every square inch of limestone and velvet. They poured millions of dollars into the ground, a staggering sum for the era, marshalling an army of laborers who toiled in the heat to erect a steel skeleton that would eventually be clad in the finest materials the world could offer, creating a vertical city capable of housing thousands. This was the era of the machine age. Yet the Biltmore was designed to look back, to emulate the palaces of European nobility, a deliberate affectation intended to lend an air of ancient aristocracy to a city that was barely older than the film industry it hosted. The psychological drive here is palpable. The need to cover the dusty, seismic reality of California with a veneer of permanent, old-world grandeur. Every decision, from the imported travertine floors to the hand-painted Giovanni Smeraldi murals on the ceilings, was a calculated performance of wealth, a desperate insistence that culture had arrived in the West. But in their quest for perfection, the builders created something almost too imposing, a labyrinth of luxury that felt less like a home and more like a stage set, a feeling that persists to this day where one feels not like a guest, but like an extra in a period film that is slowly turning into a horror story. The sheer scale of the ambition required a darkness to balance it, a shadow cast by the brilliant light of the chandeliers, and as the steel beams rose, they boxed in a volume of space that would soon become a container for the city's most clandestine activities. When the doors finally opened in 1923, the event was not merely a party but a coronation of the city's elite, a night where the air vibrated with the sound of jazz orchestras and the clinking of illicit champagne glasses. For even as the hotel celebrated its birth, the country was deep in the grip of prohibition, turning the Biltmore into a paradoxical temple of lawlessness disguised as high society. Thousands of guests flooded the Galleria Real, a hallway so long and ornate it was dubbed the longest hallway in the West. Their laughter echoing off the hand-painted friezes of mythological beasts and gods, while beneath their feet, in the bowels of the building, the real machinery of the hotel was beginning to hum. The gala was a spectacle of blinding light, a sensory overload of orchids, silk, and diamonds, designed to distract from the reality that Los Angeles was a city run by vice syndicates and corrupt politicians who were all present that night, shaking hands and toasting to the future. The beauty of the Biltmore in those early days was a weapon, a dazzling deflection that allowed the power brokers to operate with impunity, using the hotel's private suites and back rooms to carve up the city's territories and decide the fate of municipal contracts. The Gold Room, with its hidden liquor compartments and heavy drapery, became the epicenter of this duality, a space where the glittering facade of the Roaring Twenties met the gritty undercurrent of organized crime. It is impossible to separate the architecture from this social context. The wide corridors were designed for promenading, yes, but the multiple exits, the service elevators, and the complex floor plans were equally suited for evasion and clandestine meetings. The hotel was a living organism that breathed in the money of the wealthy and exhaled the smoke of their secrets. As the jazz played on, a different kind of foundation was being laid, not of concrete but of complicity. The Biltmore was establishing itself as neutral ground, a sanctuary where the normal rules of society were suspended in favor of discretion, a quality that would eventually attract a darker class of clientele who sought anonymity not for pleasure, but for survival. Beneath the velvet ropes and the crystal chandeliers lies the true heart of the Biltmore's mystery. The rumors and realities of the underground tunnels that radiate outward from the hotel's subbasements like the roots of a poisonous tree, connecting the glamorous world above with the subterranean darkness of a city that was rapidly becoming the noir capital of the world. While historians and skeptics often debate the extent and purpose of these tunnels, dismissing some as mere utility corridors or service passages, the persistent oral history of Los Angeles tells a different story, one of Prohibition-era logistics where these subterranean arteries served as the bloodstream for the illicit liquor trade that kept the parties upstairs fueling until dawn. It is said that these tunnels connected the hotel to other key locations in downtown, perhaps even stretching toward the chaotic rail lines or old speakeasies, allowing high-profile guests, politicians, and gangsters to move unseen beneath the feet of the LAPD, or more likely, with the LAPD's paid cooperation. Walking through the lower levels of the Biltmore today, one feels a sudden drop in temperature and a shift in acoustic pressure, a sensory confirmation that you have entered a space designed for function and concealment rather than display. The air down here is stagnant, smelling of old grease and ancient dust, a stark contrast to the perfumed lobby 3 floors above. During the 1920s and 30s, this was the domain of the bootlegger and the bagman, a shadowy reflection of the Gilded Age ballroom where the raw materials of vice were transported. The existence of these tunnels speaks to the architecture of paranoia that defined the era. The wealthy and powerful needed a trapdoor, an escape route, a way to indulge their appetites without facing the public consequences. Whether all the legends of tunnels leading to the subway or secret bunkers are true is almost irrelevant, because the idea of the tunnels created a psychological reality where the Biltmore was seen as a fortress with a hidden dimension, a place where people could vanish. This reputation for subterranean secrecy made the hotel a magnet for conspiracy theories, planting the seed that what happens on the surface is merely a distraction from the real operations taking place in the dark, a theme that would resonate decades later in the tragic narrative of Elizabeth Short. The cultural zenith of the Biltmore, and the moment that solidified its place in the mythology of Hollywood, came with the early Academy Awards, specifically the founding banquet of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in the Crystal Ballroom, a venue of such overwhelming opulence that it seemed to mock the economic depression that was beginning to grip the rest of the country. It was here, amidst the swirl of cigarette smoke and the clatter of silver on china, that the legendary Cedric Gibbons sketched the design for the Oscar statuette on a Biltmore linen napkin, a moment of casual genius that birthed the most coveted symbol in the entertainment industry. However, looking back at these events through the lens of history, the glamour takes on a sickly, feverish quality. The film industry was a factory of illusions, and the Biltmore was its showroom, a place where stars were manufactured and scandals were managed. The Biltmore Bowl, a massive nightclub and event space added later, became the arena where the gods of the screen mingled with the mortals who funded them, creating a volatile mix of ego, alcohol, and desperation. The hotel became the stage for the ultimate performance of the Hollywood dream. But behind the smiles and the acceptance speeches lay a brutal system of control, where studios dictated the lives of their stars and where the hotel staff were paid to be deaf and blind to the debauchery in the suites upstairs. This era established the Biltmore as a place where reality was malleable, where a person could reinvent themselves with the right wardrobe and the right room key. But it also established the hotel as a place of profound loneliness. To be in the center of the crowd at the Biltmore, surrounded by the most famous faces on earth, was often to be completely isolated, trapped in a golden cage of public expectation. The energy of these nights has soaked into the woodwork. The Crystal Ballroom today still feels charged with a frantic, nervous energy, as if the ghosts of fading starlets and anxious producers are still bargaining for their souls in the corners. It was a machine for generating fame, but like all machines, it required fuel, and that fuel was often the innocence and sanity of the young men and women who flocked to Los Angeles, drawn by the light of the Biltmore only to be burned by the heat. As the 1930s bled into the 1940s and the world descended into war, the Biltmore transformed once again, shedding its purely hedonistic skin to become a hub of wartime activity, a transit point for servicemen heading to the Pacific Theater and a hive of espionage where the walls truly had ears. The lobby became a sea of uniforms, a chaotic intersection of fate where soldiers enjoyed their last nights of luxury before shipping out to uncertain dooms, drinking with a fervor that only the proximity of death can inspire. This era added a layer of tragedy to the hotel's atmosphere, a vibration of doomed romance and fleeting connections, where marriages were proposed and consummated in a span of 48 hours within the guest rooms. But with the war came a darker element. The intelligence operatives, the spies, and the profiteers who used the hotel's anonymity to conduct the business of conflict. The Biltmore was no longer just a playground. It was a node in the global struggle, and the shadows in the bar grew longer and deeper. It was in this post-war atmosphere, a city teeming with displaced men, traumatized veterans, and drifters, that the hotel's most infamous association would take root. The transition from the unified purpose of the war to the fragmented, cynical reality of 1947 Los Angeles created a vacuum of morality, a noir landscape where predators roamed freely, camouflaged by the dense urban crowds. The Biltmore, standing as the grand dame of the city, became a beacon for lost souls, including a young woman named Elizabeth Short, whose presence in the hotel would forever stain its reputation with the color of blood. The war had hardened the city, stripped away its innocence, and the Biltmore reflected this hardening. The staff had seen too much, the guests were more desperate, and the luxury had begun to feel slightly tarnished, like cheap jewelry losing its plating. It was the perfect setting for a tragedy that would capture the imagination of the world, a stage set for a horror that was all too real. Enter Elizabeth Short, the woman who would become posthumously known as the Black Dahlia, a figure whose tragic end has been mythologized to the point of abstraction, stripping her of humanity and turning her into a macabre puzzle piece in the city's history. But before she was a corpse in a vacant lot, she was a living, breathing young woman of 22, drifting through the currents of Los Angeles with a suitcase full of clothes and a head full of vague ambitions, using the Biltmore Hotel not as a home, but as a temporary anchor in a life that was rapidly coming unmoored. On January 9, 1947, she walked through the Olive Street entrance, a figure in a black suit and white fluffy blouse, blending in with the other guests but carrying a distinct aura of anxiety and displacement. To sit in the Biltmore lobby today is to occupy the same physical space she did in her final hours of visibility. The high ceilings, the potted palms, and the murmuring crowd are largely unchanged, creating a chilling temporal overlap. She was allegedly waiting for someone, or perhaps hiding from someone, using the hotel's public grandeur as a shield against the vulnerability of being a single woman with no money and nowhere to go in a predatory city. The Biltmore was a safe place, a respectable establishment where a lady could sit and make phone calls without being harassed. Yet it was also the precipice from which she fell. Witnesses reported seeing her in the lobby, making calls, looking nervous, perhaps meeting a man. The details are fragmented, distorted by time and the frenzy of the press that followed her death. This moment, her presence in the lobby, represents the collision of the Biltmore's two worlds: the surface world of safety and civilization, and the underground world of danger and violence. She sat at the intersection of these two realities, and when she walked out of those doors and into the night, she crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The hotel did not kill her, but it was the last witness to her life, the final backdrop against which she existed as a person rather than a headline. The specifics of that final sighting on January 9th are etched into the folklore of the hotel, repeated by tour guides and ghost hunters ad nauseum, but the horror lies in the mundane nature of the event. A woman waiting, a doorman tipping his hat, the heavy revolving door spinning her out onto the sidewalk. It is the banality of the evil that is terrifying. The Biltmore continued to operate, guests continued to check in, drinks were poured, and music played, all while Elizabeth Short was being led to an unimaginable fate just miles away. The Biltmore became a pivotal location in the LAPD investigation that followed the discovery of her mutilated body in Leimert Park, with detectives swarming the lobby, interrogating staff, and dusting the phone booths for prints, turning the hotel into a crime scene annex. The contrast between the brutality of her murder, the bisection, the Glasgow smile, and the refined elegance of the Biltmore lobby created a cognitive dissonance that the public found irresistible. How could someone go from the velvet armchairs of the Biltmore to a weed-choked lot in such a state of desecration? The hotel became a character in the narrative of the Black Dahlia, representing the before picture of glamour that made the after picture of gore so much more shocking. The media frenzy that descended on the hotel was ravenous, with reporters camping out in the bar, trading theories and buying drinks for anyone who claimed to have seen Beth that night. This was the moment the Biltmore lost its innocence completely. It was no longer just a place of celebration, but a place where the Grim Reaper had stopped for a drink. The Black Dahlia case exposed the rot at the core of Los Angeles, the intersection of transient Hollywood dreams and psychotic violence, and the Biltmore was right at the center of the web. The mystery of who she met, and whether they led her out through the main doors or down into the shadows of a service exit, remains the ultimate unanswered question, a ghost that walks the hallways to this day. Following the Black Dahlia scandal, the Biltmore did not shudder or fade. Instead, it calcified, becoming a harder, more cynical institution that embraced its role as the keeper of the city's dark secrets. The publicity, however morbid, solidified its status as the most important building in town, drawing in curiosity seekers and those who wanted to brush up against the edge of the abyss. But as the 1950s rolled on, the nature of the hotel's darkness shifted from the noir violence of the streets to the cold, calculated violence of politics. The hotel had always been a favorite of power brokers, but it now became the de facto headquarters for political machinations on a national scale. The smoke-filled rooms were real here, suites where the destiny of the country was debated over scotch and cigars, where deals were cut that would send young men to die in foreign wars and reshape the economy. The 1960 Democratic National Convention, which saw John F. Kennedy clinch the nomination, centered its activities around the Biltmore, turning the hotel into a pressure cooker of ambition and intrigue. The music room, now the lobby, and the various ballrooms were filled with delegates, fixers, and spies from rival factions. While Kennedy's team operated out of the Biltmore, the atmosphere was thick with the tension of the Cold War and the shifting tides of American culture. The hotel was a hive of frantic energy, but beneath the bunting and the patriotic speeches, the old ghosts were watching. The Biltmore's ability to seamlessly transition from a crime scene investigation to a presidential coronation speaks to its neutrality. The building does not judge, it merely provides the space for human will to exert itself, whether that will is directed toward murder or governance. The corridors that once echoed with the footsteps of Elizabeth Short now echoed with the Secret Service and the heavy tread of future presidents. But the underlying frequency of the place remained the same, a vibration of intense, desperate human striving. As the decades wore on and the 1960s bled into the 70s, the geography of Los Angeles shifted dramatically, with wealth and power migrating west toward Beverly Hills and Santa Monica, leaving downtown to rot in a slow, agonizing decline. The Biltmore, once the crown jewel, found itself stranded in a deteriorating urban landscape, surrounded by the encroaching misery of Skid Row and a business district that emptied out at 5 p.m., leaving the streets to the homeless and the predatory. This was the era of the hotel's gray period, where the glamour began to peel away like old paint, revealing the decaying infrastructure beneath. The hotel became a fortress in a war zone, its doormen guarding the gates against a rising tide of urban decay. Inside, the carpets grew threadbare, the gold leaf tarnished by decades of cigarette smoke, and the vast, empty hallways took on a sinister, haunted quality that no amount of polish could hide. It was during these years that the legends of the Biltmore's hauntings truly began to take root in the public consciousness. With fewer guests to disturb the silence, the staff began to report strange occurrences. Sounds of children playing on the roof where no children were, the apparition of a nurse on the second floor, and the inexplicable sensation of being watched from the balconies of the Crystal Ballroom. The decay of the surrounding city seemed to seep through the walls, infecting the hotel with a sense of melancholic dread. It was no longer the place to be seen. It was a place to be hidden. The vastness of the hotel, once a sign of grandeur, now felt oppressive, a giant mausoleum for a dead era. The Biltmore ghost stories were not just campfire tales. They were a psychological response to the dying grandeur of the place, a way to humanize the emptiness. The building felt alive because it was dying, its creaks and groans interpreted as the voices of the past refusing to leave. The specific nature of the Biltmore's hauntings is worth examining not as proof of the supernatural, but as a reflection of the emotional imprint the hotel has left on its inhabitants. The most persistent story involves the ghost of a nurse, often seen on the second floor, a remnant of the war years perhaps, or a spectral memory of a tragedy that never made the papers. Then there is the boy on the roof, a playful but unsettling presence often blamed for flickering lights and moved objects. But the most chilling phenomena are not the visual apparitions but the auditory and sensory ones. The sound of a party in an empty ballroom, the smell of gardenias, Elizabeth Short's favorite flower, according to myth, wafting through a sterile corridor, the feeling of a cold hand on a shoulder in the elevator. These stories persist because the architecture of the Biltmore is designed to amplify fear. The scale is wrong for the human body, the ceilings too high, the shadows too deep. It is an example of the liminal space effect, where a transition zone like a hotel hallway becomes terrifying because it is not a destination, but a passage, a place where one is neither here nor there. In the Biltmore, these spaces are clad in the aesthetics of a bygone era, adding a layer of temporal dislocation. When you walk the halls at night, you are walking through the 1920s, the 40s, and the 70s simultaneously. The ghost stories are the mind's way of populating this void, of making sense of the oppressive weight of history. Whether or not spirits actually walk the floors, the fear is real, a tangible current that runs through the building's wiring. Paranormal investigators flock to the hotel, armed with EMF meters and cameras, hoping to capture evidence of the afterlife, but they often miss the point. The Biltmore itself is the ghost, a phantom of a city that no longer exists, haunting the modern world with its refusal to die. The structural preservation of the Biltmore amidst the collapse of downtown LA in the late 20th century is nothing short of miraculous, or perhaps suspicious, depending on your level of cynicism. While other historic landmarks were bulldozed to make way for parking lots and glass boxes, the Biltmore survived, protected by a combination of historical designation and the sheer, stubborn mass of its construction. In the 1980s, a massive restoration project was undertaken to scrub away the grime of the decline and restore the hotel to its 1923 glory. This process was akin to an archaeological dig. As workers peeled back layers of cheap paint and modernization, they revealed the original frescoes and stonework, but they also disturbed the dust of the past. Restoration is a form of exorcism, a cleansing of the physical corruption, but it cannot remove the metaphysical stains. The new Biltmore that emerged was a dazzling replica of its former self, yet it felt different, sterilized, perhaps, or simply masking its age with heavy makeup. The restoration highlighted the contrast between the hotel's interior fantasy world and the harsh reality of Los Angeles outside its doors. The windows were sealed tighter, the security increased, the illusion of separation reinforced. This era saw the hotel pivoting to become a filming location, capitalizing on its spooky, atmospheric grandeur. It played the role of the Sedgwick Hotel in Ghostbusters, a fitting casting choice that cemented its reputation as a place where the barrier between the living and the dead is thin. The movie industry, which had helped build the Biltmore's legend, returned to use its carcass as a set, blurring the lines between the hotel's real history and its fictional representations. Now, when people see the Crystal Ballroom, they see it through the filter of cinema, unsure if they are remembering a scene from a movie or a historical event. This layering of fiction over fact is the quintessential Los Angeles experience, and the Biltmore is its temple. The conspiracy theories surrounding the Biltmore are not limited to ghosts and gangsters. They extend into the realm of the occult and the Illuminati, fueled by the hotel's esoteric symbolism and its history of hosting the global elite. The architecture itself is rich with Masonic and Beaux-Arts iconography. Sphinxes, cherubs, astrological signs, and grotesque gargoyles that peer down from the cornices. For the conspiratorial mind, these are not mere decorations but sigils, markers of a temple dedicated to hidden knowledge. The fact that the hotel has hosted Bilderberg-style meetings, political summits, and gatherings of the ultra-wealthy adds fuel to the fire. Theorists point to the layout of the floors, the eye in the pyramid motifs hidden in the carpet designs, and the sheer exclusivity of the private clubs within the hotel as proof that the Biltmore is a node in a global control grid. The tunnels, once the domain of bootleggers, are reimagined in these theories as entrances to deep underground military bases or ritual chambers. While these ideas are easily dismissed as fantasy, they speak to the psychological power the building exerts. It looks like the headquarters of a secret society. It feels like a place where the world is run from the shadows. The human mind craves patterns, and the Biltmore provides an endless supply of visual data to connect. The hotel's very existence, an opulence that defies the logic of its surroundings, suggests a hidden source of power. Why is it here? Who really owns it? What happens in the rooms that aren't on the map? The Biltmore absorbs these projections, remaining silent, which only serves to amplify the paranoia. In a city built on facades, the Biltmore is the ultimate mask, and the suspicion that something terrible is hiding behind it is a natural reaction to its impenetrable grandeur. Modern perception of the Biltmore is a schizophragmented experience, split between its function as a high-end wedding venue and its identity as a destination for dark tourism. On any given Saturday, you might find a bride in a white gown posing for photos on the same staircase where detectives once hunted for clues to a dismemberment, or a quinceañera celebration echoing in the ballroom while a ghost tour group whispers about suicide in the hallway. This juxtaposition is jarring. A danse macabre where the celebrations of life are performed on a stage set for death. The hotel management, understandably, tries to downplay the dark history, focusing on the romance and the architecture, but they cannot erase the Google search results. The Black Dahlia is as much a part of the brand as the afternoon tea. Guests who check in are often looking for that thrill, the frisson of sleeping in a haunted hotel, hoping for a scare that is safe and contained. But the Biltmore's darkness is not a theme park attraction. It is the weight of accumulated human misery and corruption. The paradox is that the hotel's beauty is enhanced by its tragedy. The gold shines brighter because of the shadows. If it were just a clean, modern Marriott, no one would care. It is the patina of fear that gives it value. The Biltmore angel statues in the lobby seem to watch this modern parade with indifference, frozen observers of the folly of a new generation that thinks it can buy a piece of history without inheriting the curse that comes with it. The wedding guests drink their champagne, oblivious to the fact that they are dancing on a graveyard of memories, their joy a fleeting spark in the long, dark timeline of the building. The physical sensation of the Biltmore's upper floors warrants a specific investigation. For this is where the public facade falls away and the hotel becomes a labyrinth of endless, identical corridors. The shift from the lobby's soaring ceilings to the claustrophobic, low hallways of the guest floors is a deliberate architectural choice, intended to maximize room count but resulting in a disorienting maze. The carpets are thick, swallowing the sound of footsteps so that movement becomes stealthy by default. The doors are heavy, wood-paneled barriers that seal off the occupants from the world. It is in these hallways that the shining effect is most potent. The repetition of doors, lights, and patterns creates a sense of infinite regress, where one could walk forever and never find the exit. This is the domain of the solitary traveler, the businessman staring at the ceiling, the illicit lovers hiding from spouses. The energy here is static, trapped. Stories of guests hearing arguments in empty rooms or seeing shadows dart under doors are common. The architecture forces introspection. There is nothing to look at but the walls, so you are forced to look inside yourself, and often what you find is fear. The elevators, with their brass doors and mechanical hum, act as decompression chambers, moving you from the world of the living, the lobby, to the world of the dormant, the rooms. There is a distinct smell on these floors, a mix of industrial cleaner, old fabric, and something metallic that triggers a primal alertness. It is the smell of a place that has been used by millions of strangers, each leaving a microscopic trace of their existence. The Biltmore's guest floors are a hive of transient humanity, a storage facility for sleepers, and there is something deeply unsettling about being just one more body in a box in a stack of thousands. Let us return to the tunnels, specifically the blocked-off sections that are no longer accessible to the public or even the general staff. These sealed arteries are the subconscious of the building, the places where the trauma is buried. Urban explorers and maintenance workers whisper about bricked-up doorways and staircases that lead to nowhere, remnants of the hotel's reconfiguration over the decades. What is trapped behind those walls? Old speakeasy furniture? Files from the 1930s? Or simply the stagnant air of the past? The idea of the sealed room is a staple of Gothic horror, and the Biltmore is a Gothic structure in spirit if not in style. The tunnels represent the things we choose to forget, the infrastructure of vice that we pave over but never truly remove. There are rumors of a subway stop that was never opened, a ghost station beneath the hotel intended for the elite to travel in private. Whether true or not, the concept fits the Biltmore's narrative. A place designed to separate the us from the them, the masters from the masses. The darkness of the tunnels is the darkness of exclusion. In the modern era, these spaces are likely filled with fiber optic cables and HVAC ducts, but the myth is stronger than the blueprint. We need the tunnels to be there, to be filled with secrets, because if they are just empty basements, then the Biltmore is just a building, and we are forced to confront the banality of our own history. The tunnels allow us to believe in a deeper meaning, a hidden plot, rather than the chaotic randomness of reality. They are the physical manifestation of the conspiracy theory. The political legacy of the Biltmore extends beyond the DNC and into the localized corruption of Los Angeles city government. For decades, the hotel's bars and restaurants were the unofficial annex of City Hall. This is where zoning laws were bent, where police chiefs were chosen, and where bribes were exchanged in the form of consulting fees or high-stakes poker losses. The Grand Avenue Bar has heard more confessions than any church in the diocese. This pedestrian, bureaucratic corruption is the true dark heart of the hotel, far more damaging than any ghost or gangster. It was the quiet, polite erosion of the public trust, facilitated by the comfort and privacy of the Biltmore's booths. The hotel provided the scenery for the men who sold out the city's transit system, who redlined neighborhoods, who militarized the police force. These decisions, made over martini lunches, had real-world body counts. In the poverty of South LA, in the smog that choked the basin, in the riots that would eventually burn the city. The Biltmore is complicit in the shaping of modern Los Angeles, a silent partner in the crimes of the state. To walk through the hotel is to walk through the nerve center of a regime that prioritized profit over people. The luxury of the surroundings served to normalize this corruption, to make it feel gentlemanly and inevitable. It is the banality of evil draped in velvet. When we look at the Biltmore, we should not just see a pretty building. We should see the headquarters of the status quo, the fortress of the establishment that held the city in its grip for a century. As we approach the end of this investigation, we must confront the Biltmore's role as a survivor. Why does it still stand when so much of old LA is gone? It is protected, yes, but it also possesses a certain malevolent resilience. It is too big to fail in architectural form. It has weathered earthquakes, riots, economic depressions, and pandemics. It sits on Pershing Square like a brooding elder god, watching the city swirl around it. The modern skyscrapers of the financial district dwarf it in height, but they lack its presence, its gravity. They are glass shells. The Biltmore is stone and bone. There is a sense that the building is waiting for the cycle to turn, for the city to collapse and be born again, knowing that it will still be there. This permanence is both comforting and terrifying. It suggests that the past is never truly gone, that the sins of the fathers are preserved in limestone. The Biltmore is a time capsule that refuses to remain buried. Every time a new guest checks in, they are entering a contract with history, agreeing to share the space with the accumulated energy of 1923, 1947, 1960. The hotel demands respect, not for its service, but for its survival. It is a reminder that while human lives are fragile and fleeting, like Elizabeth Short's, the structures of power and memory are enduring. The Biltmore does not care about you. It does not care if you are afraid of the dark. It has seen thousands of you come and go. It is the indifferent, immortal witness. In the final analysis, the Biltmore Hotel is a mirror held up to the face of Los Angeles. It reflects the city's vanity, its ambition, its violence, and its desperate need to be loved. It is beautiful, yes, breathtakingly so, but it is a beauty born of pain, a diamond formed by the crushing pressure of greed and secrets. The frescoes are painted on a canvas of lies. The marble floors are polished with the sweat of the invisible class. To investigate the Biltmore is to peel back the skin of the city and see the disease underneath, but also to marvel at the complexity of the anatomy. It is a place of duality, light and dark, upstairs and downstairs, fame and oblivion. As you leave the hotel and step back out into the cool night air of Pershing Square, the heavy doors swing shut with a sound that is final and authoritative. You are released from its grip, but a part of you remains inside, trapped in the amber of its atmosphere. You look back at the facade, the windows glowing like eyes in the darkness, and you realize that the Biltmore is not just a hotel. It is a tomb. It is a monument to the things we try to hide, a grand, golden sarcophagus for the American dream, where the ghosts of the past are not intruders, but the only permanent residents. The silence of the Biltmore is the silence of a secret kept for 100 years, and as long as the stones stand, that secret will never be fully told. The investigation never truly ends. It just circles the building, looking for a door that is already locked from the inside.